A young bank employee's sharp voice broke the silence in the luxurious space. His gaze, filled with clear disdain, scanned the elderly man standing at the counter from head to toe. "You're in the wrong place," he sneered. "This isn't a place for people like you. Please leave." The elderly man, about 83 years old, wore tattered clothes, worn-out plastic sandals, and was dragging a heavy, old burlap sack behind him. His eyes, unwavering, and his slow but patient voice spoke calmly. "I'm here to deposit my savings, young man. This money in the sack belongs to me." The employee raised an eyebrow, followed by a mocking laugh. He pointed to the sack with one finger, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Money in that sack? Let me guess. It's just a bunch of loose change you've collected. We don't have time to deal with this kind of thing." Despite the mockery, the old man remained calm. His hands trembled slightly from having carried the heavy sack over a long distance, but his voice remained gentle, almost as if he were holding back a deeper meaning. "This is the result of my hard work over my entire life. I wish to deposit it for my future." The employee turned away with a laugh, drawing the attention of a few colleagues nearby. One of them murmured loudly enough for the old man to hear, "This bank is handling torn sacks full of coins now? What a waste of time." In the modern gleaming atmosphere of the bank, the old man looked like an outcast. The glass counters reflected the bright lights of the ceiling, creating an illusion of sophistication. Bank employees, dressed in sharp suits, were bustling around, handling transactions with well-dressed clients. The automatic doors opened, and the sound of the heavy sack dragging across the tiled floor drew the eyes of everyone in the vicinity. Its weight caused the old man to stoop with each step, each one deliberate but heavy. When he reached the counter, he carefully placed the sack on the ground, his eyes scanning the surroundings as if confirming that he had come to the right place. But his shabby appearance, his small stature, and the worn-out sandals made him an object of scorn, not curiosity. The other customers, dressed in suits and elegant dresses, couldn't hide their disapproving glances. A middle-aged woman, adorned with sparkling jewelry, whispered to the man sitting next to her, "Are they letting people like him into this bank now? This is lowering the standard." The elderly man, unfazed by the murmurs, focused only on the bank clerk in front of him, silently waiting for assistance. But all he received was a cold dismissal. "This is a waste of time. You should take your sack and leave. We don't handle things like this," the employee repeated, this time with a tone that seemed to insist that he was undeserving of service. The old man said nothing. He bent down, lifted the heavy sack with a slight sigh, his face tinged with sadness but still composed. The bank employee stood tall behind the counter, arms crossed, a look of annoyance on his face. He stared at the old man's sack before mocking, "We don't deal with loose change here. Take it home and don't waste your time coming here again." The elderly man bent down slightly, his weathered hands gripping the edge of the sack. His voice, though calm, carried a quiet resolve. "This is the result of a lifetime of saving. I want to deposit it so I can live with peace of mind in the future. If you won't accept it, I'll wait for someone with more authority." The employee scoffed and turned to his colleague, speaking in a mocking tone. "He wants to see someone in charge. Like we've got time to sit around counting coins all day." Both employees chuckled, their laughter cutting through the tension in the air. The customers nearby started whispering louder. One well-dressed man in his suit shook his head, glancing at the old man. "What a nuisance. I don't understand why they let people like that in here. Why did the bank allow people like this to step inside?" A young woman had just finished signing her papers. She glanced at the elderly man with a look of disdain before turning to her friend. "What a waste of time. We're busy. We don't have time to sit here watching this." Suddenly, from the direction of the transaction counter, a middle-aged man in a sharp suit walked out. He was the branch manager, his face stern and serious. He headed straight for the service desk, his eyes scanning over the elderly man and the heavy sack lying. "What's going on here?" His voice rang out, causing an immediate silence to fall over the room. The staff immediately stood straight, nodding respectfully to the manager. One of them quickly responded, "It's nothing serious, sir." This elderly man just brought in a sack of loose change to deposit, but we didn't think it was worth taking the time to process. The manager nodded slightly, his gaze still cold and unwelcoming as he looked at the old man. He walked over to the sack, glanced at it one more time, and said in a calm yet condescending tone, "I'm sorry, sir, but we cannot process this money. You're wasting the time." The elderly man met the manager's eyes. There was no anger in his gaze, only deep sadness. His voice, though slow and steady, held a quiet dignity. "You can tell your superiors. I'm Will." The manager frowned, clearly not wanting to engage any further. He turned to the security guard standing nearby, signaling for him to escort the old man out. "We can't let this kind of thing affect the bank's operations." The tall, imposing security guard approached the elderly man, his voice dropping in tone. "Sir, if you have no other business, could you please leave? You've been here too long, and it's Mac." The old man remained silent. His eyes scanned the room, glancing at the customers seated at the transaction counters and waiting chairs. Most of them avoided looking at him, some even turning their faces away in annoyance. Not a single person spoke in his defense. With a quiet sigh, the elderly man bent down to lift the heavy sack. His hands shook as he grasped it, his shoulders slightly hunched under its weight. Yet his steps were slow and deliberate. He didn't argue, didn't show anger or resistance. He simply left. The noise in the bank resumed, but the lingering silence of what had just happened left several people uneasy. One young staff member standing nearby couldn't shake off the troubling image of the old man leaving. His gaze was full of concern as he watched the frail figure walk away. At the transaction counter next to him, a young employee, new to the job, with bright eyes full of energy, had observed the entire scene. His face still carried the youthful look of inexperience, but his eyes were full of conviction. Seeing how unjustly the old man had been treated, he couldn't hide his displeasure. "He came here to deposit money," he said quietly, though loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. "We should have served him properly. We should have checked before turning him away." The words hung in the air, causing a brief pause. The staff member who had mocked the elderly man turned toward him, raising an eyebrow, a sneer crossing his face. "You really don't get it, do you?" he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Look at him. What money could he possibly have to deposit? That sack is probably full of loose change. It would take longer to count than it's worth." Some colleagues around them chuckled at his words, but the young employee didn't back down. Standing firm, he walked over to the elderly man and asked gently, "Sir, may I check the contents of your sack?" The elderly man raised his head, surprised for a moment. Still, he nodded in agreement. His frail hands gently lowered the sack to the floor. A few staff members shot him disapproving glances, muttering quietly amongst themselves. "This is going to be a waste of time," one whispered. Ignoring the murmurs, the young employee bent down and carefully untied the sack. As he pulled back the worn cloth, a sight that stunned everyone nearby emerged. Inside, Neatly stacked and carefully bundled were dozens of rolls of loose change. The entire bank fell silent. The laughter stopped. In place of mocking smirks, there was now a collective sense of disbelief and uncertainty. The young employee stood up, his face showing a mixture of surprise and newfound respect. A young bank employee was carefully counting stacks of small denomination bills. The murmurs in the room hinted at amusement, with one nearby colleague muttering, "Is this all small change?" The young man gently placed each bundle on the counter before turning to the elderly man, who had brought them in. "Sir, how long did it take you to save all of this?" he asked respectfully. The elderly man, with a calm but dignified voice, replied, "My entire life. This is from selling lottery tickets, collecting recyclable bottles, and doing odd jobs over the years. I saved every penny I could." At that moment, the room grew quiet. Both employees and customers who had chuckled earlier now stood in stunned silence. A sense of shame crept across their faces as the weight of his words sank in. The old man raised his head, his gaze gentle and full of tranquility. He smiled softly, speaking slowly yet warmly. "It's nothing extraordinary, my child. I'm just a man who sells lottery tickets and collects scraps. I've been doing this job for decades. Every penny I've earned has come from hard work, sweat, and tears. Through rainy days and scorching heat, I don't spend much. I save every coin to build a safety net for my old age, because I know no one will take care of me better than I can take care of myself." His words were like a cool breeze, refreshing the stuffy room. The people in the bank, from the employees to the customers, were stunned and moved by his sincerity. A young woman nearby lowered her head. Just moments ago, she had whispered sarcastically to her friend, calling him a lazy old man with no purpose. But now, those words filled her with deep shame. Another bank employee, who had earlier mocked him, couldn't look him in the eye. He awkwardly turned to his colleague and sighed. "We were wrong. I never imagined he could have saved such a fortune by living so frugally." The only young employee who had defended the old man earlier clenched the receipt tightly in his hand. He approached him with respect, bowed, and said, "Sir, I truly admire you, not only for the money you've saved, but for your patience and unwavering will. Thank you for teaching us such an important lesson." The old man nodded gently, his eyes clouded with age, but still shining with kindness. "It's nothing, my boy. Everyone faces challenges in life. I just hope people will respect each other, no matter what they look like." His story spread quickly through the room. Some customers who had earlier mocked him now sat in silence, gazing at him with respect. One of them even approached him, bowed gently, and said, "Sir, you've made me rethink a lot of things. Thank you for sharing your story." The bank manager, standing at a distance, could feel the shame growing in his heart. He couldn't look the old man in the eye and bowed his head deeply, speaking with a choked voice. We are sorry for not showing you the respect you deserve from the start. I promise our bank will never allow something like this to happen again." His apology, though sincere, couldn't erase the guilt felt by those who had laughed at the old man. Still, the old man didn't respond with anger or bitterness. He simply nodded and offered a gentle smile, like a father forgiving his wayward children. After receiving his transaction receipt, the old man stood up slowly. His small frame exuded calmness and confidence. As he prepared to leave, carrying his empty sack, the bank door suddenly swung open, and a well-dressed, middle-aged man entered. "Father, are you done with your business?" The warm voice filled the room, drawing everyone's attention. The old man looked up, smiling softly. "Ah, you're here." The man quickly walked over and gently took the sack from his father. At that moment, whispers filled the bank. Is that man really his son? Who is he? He looks so powerful. Before anyone could ask more questions, a nearby customer recognized the middle-aged man and exclaimed, "That's Mr. Lamb. He's the CEO of the largest construction company in the region." The revelation stunned everyone. The bank fell silent, with all eyes shifting from the man to the old man, then back to each other, filled with disbelief. The middle-aged man, still holding the sack, turned to address the bank employees. "Yes, he is my father," he said with pride in his voice. "But my father has always chosen to live humbly and independently. I've invited him countless times to live with my family, but he always refuses. He says he feels at peace knowing he can manage his own finances and life." He turned to the crowd. "The money you saw today is the result of my father's lifetime of hard work." The entire room was silent. The employees who had once ridiculed the old man now couldn't raise their heads. The manager, who had ordered the old man to leave, stood frozen as if turned to stone, unable to look anyone in the eye. After a few moments of awkward silence, the manager slowly approached the old man, his face pale and filled with regret. He bowed deeply and spoke in a trembling voice. "Sir, we are truly sorry for not showing you the respect you deserve from the beginning. I really didn't know who you were." Other employees simultaneously lowered their heads, some whispering, "We were wrong. We're truly sorry, sir." The elderly man smiled gently, his eyes warm and forgiving, with no trace of reproach. He looked directly at the manager and calmly said, "You don't need to apologize. My identity is not important. What truly matters is how we treat each other. No matter who someone is, what they wear, or what they carry, everyone deserves respect." His words swept through the room like a gentle breeze, easing the awkwardness and leaving behind a profound lesson for everyone present. The elderly man's son, standing beside him, nodded in agreement. He turned to the bank staff and spoke firmly, yet kindly. "I hope today's story serves as a lesson for all of us. We must not allow appearances or prejudice to cloud the way we see others." The bank employees and the manager remained silent, nodding, their eyes filled with regret. The elderly man slowly rose, leaning on his son's arm. His small frame no longer seemed out of place, but radiated a quiet strength, like a living example of dignity and self-respect. The room, once filled with noise and contempt, now stood in awe and reflection. After completing his transactions, the elderly man rose again, his frail shoulders squared. He glanced at his son with a look of deep contentment. The son, with a refined demeanor, took his father's hand and gently guided him out of the transaction counter. All the people in the bank, customers and staff alike, watched in silence, their gazes no longer filled with disdain or curiosity, but with respect and a sense of remorse. As the elderly man passed, the young staff member, the only one who had stood up for him earlier, bowed deeply and said with heartfelt gratitude, "Sir, thank you for teaching me such an important lesson. I wish you good health." The elderly man turned, his eyes kind as he looked at the young man and offered a soft smile. "Thank you, son. People like you will do great things." As the father and son walked out of the bank, a strange atmosphere filled the room. The bank manager immediately called for an internal meeting. In the meeting, the manager addressed the staff seriously. "What happened today must never happen again. We were wrong to judge people based on their appearance. From now on, every customer who walks through these doors, no matter who they are, must be treated with the highest respect." The young staff member who had defended the elderly man was praised by the manager. "You did very well. We will entrust you with more responsibilities. Keep this spirit alive." These words were not only a recognition of the young man's actions, but also a valuable lesson for everyone in the bank that day. The story quickly spread across social media, shared by a customer who had been present at the bank. Posts, images, and short videos telling the story of the elderly man, dressed in tattered clothes yet carrying his life savings, along with how he confronted the disdain he faced, touched the hearts of millions. Under the post, thousands of comments flooded in. "Never judge others by their appearance. The old man is a role model for patience and dignity. And thank you for reminding me that respect is the most valuable thing we can offer one another." Meanwhile, the elderly man returned to his simple, everyday life. Despite having deposited his savings, he continued his work collecting scrap and selling lottery tickets. His way of life remained unchanged by the events at the bank. One late afternoon, after selling his last lottery ticket, his son appeared, driving a luxurious car. He stepped out and helped his father into the car. Before closing the door, the elderly man glanced back at the familiar street, smiling softly, a farewell full of contentment. The story ended with the image of the luxury car slowly driving away, carrying a small figure that exuded an air of pride and kindness. Though unintentional, the elderly man had left a profound lesson on respect, patience, and the true value of a person for all who witnessed it. Today's story reminds us that a person's worth is not determined by their appearance or the wealth they carry, but by their character, dignity, and the contributions they make throughout their life. The elderly man not only taught the bank employees a great lesson, but also inspired all of us to practice patience and respect for others. If you found this story meaningful, don't forget to like, share, and spread the positive message. Also, subscribe to the Ngon Gen Story channel so you don't miss future emotional stories. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next story.